The mining station Erebus 7 floated like a rusty wound against the backdrop of infinite stars. Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his brow as he pushed his maintenance cart through the lower levels of the station. 20 years he'd been cleaning these corridors, 20 years of being invisible to the merchants, soldiers, and travelers who passed through this waste station between civilizations. He didn't mind the anonymity. In fact, he preferred it. Being nobody meant nobody expected anything from him, and that suited Marcus just fine. The station shuddered violently, throwing Marcus against the wall. Emergency klaxons wailed as red lights bathed the corridor in hellish hues. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. A massive figure tumbled through space, leaving a trail of golden ichor that crystallized instantly in the vacuum. The being was enormous, easily the size of a small freighter, with 6 wings that had once been magnificent but now hung broken and torn. Its armor, forged from metals that shouldn't exist according to human physics, was cracked and melting. Nephilim, Marcus whispered, recognizing the form from the old Earth texts his grandmother had made him study. The ancient warriors of heaven, beings so powerful they could shatter planets with a thought. But this one was dying. The station's defensive systems activated, plasma cannons swiveling to target the falling Titan. Marcus watched in horror as the first barrage struck the Nephilim, tearing away what remained of its lower wings. The being's mouth opened in a silent scream that somehow Marcus felt in his bones. It wasn't attacking. It was fleeing. Racing to the nearest communication panel, Marcus slammed his palm against the emergency override. Control, this is maintenance level 7. Do not fire on the Nephilim. Repeat, cease fire immediately. Who the hell is this? The voice of Commander Reyes crackled through the speakers. Clear this channel immediately. Sir, it's not hostile. Look at it. Something else did this to it. The only thing we need to do is protect this station. That thing is a Class X threat. Protocol is clear. Marcus watched helplessly as another volley tore into the Nephilim. The being's 6 eyes, each one larger than a shuttle, found the station. Found him. In that moment, Marcus saw something he'd never expected to see in the eyes of a divine warrior. Fear. Raw, desperate fear, and beneath it a plea for help. The Nephilim crashed into the station's lower docking ring with enough force to buckle the reinforced hull. Atmosphere vented into space as emergency barriers slammed down. The impact threw Marcus to the floor, his head ringing from the collision. When he managed to stand, he saw that the Nephilim had somehow phased partially through the station's hull, its massive form now wedged half inside, half outside the structure. Golden blood pooled on the deck, eating through the metal like acid. The Nephilim's breathing was labored, each exhale releasing clouds of particles that sparkled and died in the artificial atmosphere. Up close, Marcus could see the true extent of the damage. These weren't wounds from conventional weapons. Something had torn into the Nephilim with claws that left reality itself scarred. Black veins of nothingness spread from each wound, slowly consuming the being's flesh. All personnel evacuate sections 40 through 47 immediately, the station's automated voice announced. Containment teams report to level 7. Marcus knew what containment meant. They'd pump the entire section full of neutralizing foam, suffocating anything inside, then vent it all into space. He had maybe 10 minutes before the teams arrived. The Nephilim's eyes found him again. This close, Marcus could see they weren't just organs for seeing. They were windows into something vast and terrible and beautiful. Galaxies swirled in those depths. Civilizations rose and fell. Stars were born and died. And in all that cosmic grandeur, there was still that very mortal fear. Please, the Nephilim spoke, and its voice was like the death of suns, like the birth of hope, like every prayer ever whispered in the dark. They come, the devourers. They feast on the divine. I'm the last of my garrison. Marcus took a step forward, then another. His every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee from this being that could unmake him with a thought. But something deeper, something fundamentally human, pushed him forward. Who did this to you? Marcus asked, surprised his voice didn't shake. We were guardians, the Nephilim gasped, more golden blood spilling from its wounds. protectors of the threshold between what is and what must never be. But the seals are breaking. They hunger for the light of creation itself, and we were the first course. The deck beneath Marcus's feet began to vibrate. He could hear the containment teams assembling in the corridor beyond the emergency barriers. Time was running out. The others of your kind, will they help? Marcus asked desperately. A sound like bitter laughter, like dying stars. They flee. All flee. The celestial hosts withdraw to their fortress realms. The Nephilim abandon their posts. Even the Watchers turn their gaze away. I am anathema now, tainted by the Devourer's touch. To aid me is to invite their attention. None will risk it. Maintenance worker, evacuate immediately. Commander Reyes's voice boomed from speakers overhead. You have 30 seconds to clear the area. Marcus looked at the dying Titan, at the black veins spreading across its form, at the fear in those impossible eyes. He thought of every time in his life he'd walked away, every time he'd chosen safety over what was right. He thought of his grandmother's words. The measure of a human isn't in their power, but in what they do when they have none. I'm not leaving, Marcus said, both to the commander and to the Nephilim. Fool, the Nephilim whispered. You cannot comprehend what comes. The Devourers consume all they touch. Your mortal frame would last less than a heartbeat against them. Maybe, Marcus said, pulling his emergency toolkit from the maintenance cart. But I've got something you divine types always seem to forget about. And what is that, mortal? Marcus pulled out a plasma cutter, its blade humming to life. We're too stupid to know when we're beat. Now let me see those wounds. We got maybe 5 minutes before they phoned this whole section, and I'll be damned if I'm letting you die on my watch. The Nephilim stared at him with all 6 eyes, and for the first time in eons, felt something it had thought lost to its kind, wonder. Here was a mortal, fragile as gossamer, facing down the death of gods with nothing but determination and a maintenance tool. You try to heal wounds made by the Devourers? You would risk their attention for one already fallen. I would, Marcus said simply, approaching the nearest wound. The black veins recoiled from the plasma cutter's heat. Because nobody should die alone. Not even a Nephilim. Not even a god. As Marcus began the impossible task of treating wounds that violated the laws of physics, neither he nor the Nephilim noticed the shadows gathering at the edges of reality. The Devourers had caught the scent of their prey, and now they knew exactly where to find it. But they had not counted on one thing, a human standing guard over the fallen. The containment teams reached the barriers. In 60 seconds, they would breach. In the space between heartbeats, between one moment and the next, Marcus Chun made a choice that would echo across eternity. He raised his plasma cutter not to heal but to cut. Not the Nephilim's wounds, but the emergency barriers themselves, welding them shut. What are you doing? The Nephilim gasped. Buying us time, Marcus replied grimly. If nobody else in this universe has the guts to help you, then I guess it falls to the janitor. Story of my life, really. Always cleaning up other people's messes. The Nephilim made that sound again, and this time Marcus recognized it as genuine laughter. Here at the end of all things, with Devourers closing in and the universe itself turning away, a janitor had made a god laugh. Tell me your name. Mortal. Marcus. Marcus Chun. I am Sarathiel, last watcher of the 7th gate. And you, Marcus Chun, are either the bravest or most foolish mortal I have ever encountered. Probably both, Marcus admitted, finishing his work on the barriers. Now, let's see about keeping you alive long enough to figure out which. Outside the station, reality began to fray. The Devourers had found them. And somewhere in the cosmic distance, powers that had thought themselves beyond surprise took notice of something unprecedented, a mortal who refused to abandon the divine. The universe held its breath, waiting to see what would come of such impossible courage. In the depths of the station, alarms wailed, and soldiers cursed at barriers that wouldn't open. But in Section 45, Marcus Chun stood beside a dying god, and prepared to face horrors beyond human comprehension with nothing but wit, will, and a determination to prove that sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance could shake the heavens themselves. The welded barriers bought them time, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last. Through the hull, he could hear plasma torches working to cut through his hasty welds. Commander Reyes's voice continued to boom through the speakers, cycling between threats and pleas for Marcus to stand down. But Marcus had already crossed the point of no return. "These wounds," he said, examining the spreading black veins more closely, "they're not just physical, are they?" Sarathiel's massive form shuddered. "The Devourers exist outside conventional reality. They feed on the fundamental forces that bind existence together. When they wound us, they tear at the very concept of what we are." Marcus frowned, processing this. 20 years of maintenance work had taught him that every problem, no matter how complex, had a solution. You just had to think about it the right way. So if they're attacking your concept, your essence, what if we reinforced it? "Mortal, you speak of things beyond your comprehension. I am a being of pure thought given form, of will made manifest." "You cannot simply hold that thought," Marcus interrupted, racing to a nearby storage locker. He yanked it open, revealing emergency supplies including several canisters of neural interface gel, the substance used to help pilots meld with their ship's AI systems. This stuff creates temporary bridges between organic minds and digital constructs. If you're made of thought and, well, you propose to link your mind with mine? Sarathiel's eyes widened, galaxies spinning faster in their depths. "The feedback alone would destroy you. My memories span billions of years. My thoughts move at speeds that would shatter your neurons like glass." "Then we'll have to be careful," Marcus said, already applying the gel to his temples. "Look, I don't pretend to understand how you divine types work, but I know systems. And right now, your system is failing. You need a backup, a redundancy. Let me be that. You would die. I'm going to die anyway when those Devourers get here. At least this way, I die trying something impossible. That's pretty human of me, don't you think?" Before Sarathiel could protest further, Marcus pressed his gel-covered palms against one of the Nephilim's smaller wounds. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Marcus's consciousness exploded outward, racing through corridors of memory that stretched back to the birth of stars. He saw the universe in its infancy, watched the first Nephilim forge themselves from the raw stuff of creation. He witnessed wars that had no names because language hadn't been invented yet, saw beauty that would have driven poets mad, experienced loss on a scale that dwarfed entire civilizations. But through it all, Marcus held on to one thought, one anchor that kept his merely human mind from dissolving entirely. The maintenance protocol he'd followed every day for 20 years. Check the system. Identify the problem. Apply the fix. Test the result. Simple steps, but in their simplicity lay a strength that even cosmic beings had forgotten. In the vast network of Sarathiel's being, Marcus could see the damage more clearly. The Devourers hadn't just wounded the Nephilim's body. They had inserted something like a virus into its very essence. Black code that rewrote reality, turning existence into void. But Marcus had dealt with corrupted systems before. "There," he said, his voice sounding strange as it echoed through their temporary link. "The infection has a pattern. It's spreading along your memory channels, using your own experiences as pathways." "Then I am doomed." Sarathiel's thought voice resonated with despair. "I cannot forget what I am. To do so would be to cease existing entirely." "You don't need to forget," Marcus said, his human perspective seeing what the ancient being could not. "You need to remember differently. The Devourer's virus expects your memories to flow in one direction, from past to present. But what if we reversed it? Impossible. The arrow of time isn't absolute for beings like you." Marcus interrupted. "I can see it in your structure. You exist partially outside linear time. Use that. Remember backwards. Start from now and work your way back. The virus can't follow a path that doesn't exist yet." It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of solution that no cosmic entity would ever conceive, because it required thinking small, thinking limited, thinking human. Sarathiel began the process, and Marcus felt the shift like a tide turning. Memories flowed backward from the fallen god meeting a janitor through battles and eons back toward the moment of creation. The black veins stuttered, their spread slowing as they encountered paradoxes they couldn't process. But the effort was draining them both. Marcus felt blood running from his nose, his merely human brain struggling to maintain the connection. Sarathiel's form flickered, caught between states of being as it rewrote its own existence. That's when the shadows arrived. They didn't come through the walls or the damaged hull. They simply were, and then they were there. The Devourers defied description because description required characteristics, and they were the absence of such things. They were unlight and undark, unlarge and unsmall. They were holes in the shape of predators, and their attention fell on the linked pair like the weight of collapsed stars. So, a voice that wasn't a voice spoke, each word erasing small bits of reality. The prey finds a pet. How novel. Marcus felt Sarathiel's terror spike through their link, but underneath it he sensed something else. Shame. The Nephilim was ashamed that its fear had drawn this danger to an innocent mortal. Hey, Marcus said, both aloud and through their connection, none of that. We're in this together now. He turned to face the Devourers, though looking at them made his eyes water with the effort of seeing something that negated sight itself. You want the Nephilim? You'll have to go through me. The sound that came from the Devourers might have been laughter, if laughter could rot the air itself. Through you? Little thing, we could unmake you with a thought. You are less than dust, less than the memory of dust. Maybe, Marcus agreed, surprising everyone including himself with his calm tone. But here's the thing about dust, it gets everywhere. It clogs up machinery, ruins perfect systems. And right now, I'm clogged up good and tight in your target spiritual machinery. You want to devour, Sarathiel? You'll have to digest me first. And something tells me a divine entity stuffed full of 20 years of toilet cleaning, pipe maintenance, and the complete lyrics to every song from the 2230s is going to give you one hell of a stomachache. The Devourers paused. It was a tiny hesitation, barely perceptible, but Marcus had spent decades learning to read systems, and he recognized uncertainty when he saw it. You bluff, mortal. You cannot truly be integrated with a Nephilim. The incompatibility alone would kill me. Yeah, you mentioned that. Marcus cut them off. Funny thing, though. You're right that I'm dying. I can feel my neurons frying, my synapses burning out one by one. But here's what you cosmic types never seem to get about humans. We're really, really good at functioning while broken. Hell, most of us spend our entire lives held together with duct tape and spite. So yeah, I'm dying. But I'm also in here, mixed up in Sarathiel's code like the universe's worst computer virus. And if you try to devour him now, you get all of me too. Every boring memory, every mundane thought, every time I've wondered what's for lunch while unclogging a waste processor. Through their link, Marcus felt Sarathiel's awe. The Nephilim was beginning to understand what Marcus had instinctively grasped, that sometimes weakness could be a weapon. The Devourers fed on the divine, on the pure and powerful. But Marcus was neither. He was gloriously, stubbornly mortal, and his presence in Sarathiel's essence was like mixing sugar into a fuel tank. The Devourers circled them, their unforms writhing with what might have been frustration. They had tracked their prey across galaxies, cornered it at last, only to find it contaminated with mortality. It was like preparing to feast on ambrosia and finding it mixed with sawdust. This protection will not last, they hissed. The mortal will die, and then you'll be pure again. We are patient. We have devoured stars and souls. We can wait for one human to burn out. Sure, you could wait, Marcus agreed, his voice growing fainter as more blood ran from his eyes and ears. But here's the question. How long do you have? Because while you've been chasing Sarathiel here, focused on your one escaped meal, what's happening back at those thresholds you mentioned? Other Nephilim might be fallen, but they're not dead. Not yet. Every second you waste here is a second. They have to regroup, to prepare, to maybe figure out what I've figured out. And what have you figured out, little maintenance worker? Marcus grinned, the expression ghastly on his blood-streaked face. That you're not as inevitable as you want everyone to think. If you were, you wouldn't need a hunt. You wouldn't need a chase. You'd just be, and everything would fall into you. But you're here, arguing with a janitor, because you need to actively devour. You're not entropy. You're just another predator. And predators? Predators can be stopped. The temperature in the chamber dropped to absolute zero, then beyond, into realms where temperature lost meaning. The Devourer's rage was a palpable thing, unmaking the edges of reality. But they didn't attack. They couldn't, not without risking consuming the toxic mortality that Marcus had woven into their prey. Clever little insect, they seethed. But cleverness will not save you. When you die, and you will die, we will feast on your pet god. And then we will remember you, Marcus Chun. We will remember, and we will find every human who has ever known you, ever touched your life, and we will unmake them all. Your defiance will cost your entire species. No, Sarathiel spoke, its voice stronger now, the backwards flowing memories having bought them precious time. You will not. The Nephilim began to glow, not with its own light, but with something borrowed, something reflected. Through their link, Marcus understood. He had shown Sarathiel something it had forgotten in its eons of existence. That strength wasn't always about power. Sometimes it was about connection. What are you doing? The Devourers demanded, their forms writhing in what might have been alarm. Something I should have done eons ago, Sarathiel replied. Something we all should have done instead of fleeing, instead of abandoning our posts. I'm calling for help, but not for my kind. The glow intensified, and Marcus realized it was a signal, a beacon powered by their merged essences. But it wasn't calling to the celestial hosts or the other Nephilim. It was calling to something else entirely. You're broadcasting to the mortals, Marcus whispered in understanding. To all of them. Yes, Sarathiel confirmed. Your people have a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Devourers threaten all existence, mortal and divine alike. It's time to stop pretending this war is only for the gods to fight. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings looked up as stars pulsed with urgent meaning. The message was simple, carried on frequencies that touched minds rather than machines. The divine fall. The Devourers come. Stand with us, or all falls to nothing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From Earth, from the Centauri colonies, from species humanity had only just made contact with, signals flared back. Ships changed course. Weapons charged. Scientists dusted off theories about fighting entities that existed outside normal space-time. The mortal races, so often dismissed by the cosmic powers as insignificant, began to mobilize. Fools, the Devourers hissed. You would invite ants to a battle of giants? No, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, now as his body finally began to fail. We're inviting giants to learn from ants. Because ants know something you've forgotten, how to work together, how to build instead of just consume, how to be more than the sum of their parts. Through the station's hull, Marcus could hear the barriers finally giving way. But it didn't matter now. The message had been sent. The universe had been warned. And, more importantly, it had been united in a way it never had been before. You may devour us, Sarathiel said, its voice resonating with newfound purpose. But you will face every mortal soul doing so. And they will remember Marcus Chun, who stood when gods fled, who taught the divine that courage is not measured in power, but in a willingness to act when action seems impossible. The Devourers recoiled, their perfect hunger disrupted by an emotion they had never felt before, doubt. They had expected to feast on fleeing gods. They had not expected to face the united fury of those the gods had protected. And at the center of it all, holding it together, was a dying janitor who had chosen to clean up one more mess before the end. The barriers burst open, soldiers flooding in with weapons drawn. But they stopped, stunned by the scene before them. A cosmic horror circling a dying god, and a blood-soaked maintenance worker who stood between them like he belonged there. Commander Reyes stepped forward, his face pale, but determined. Marcus Chun, you're under arrest for... Commander, Marcus interrupted, his legs finally giving out as he sank to his knees. With all due respect, shut up and listen. We've got bigger problems than your protocols. The universe is about to go to war, and humanity just got drafted. So you can arrest me if I live through the next 5 minutes. But right now, I need you to do something more important. What's that? Marcus managed one more grin, even as his vision faded to black. Call Earth. Tell them the gods need our help. Tell them the janitor says it's time to clean house. As consciousness fled, Marcus felt Sarathiel's presence wrap around him, protective and grateful. And it had started with a mop bucket and the stubbornness of a man who refused to let anyone, god or monster, die alone on his watch. In the cosmic distance, powers that had thought themselves beyond surprise prepared for something unprecedented. The mortals were coming, and they were angry. Marcus drifted into space between life and death, his consciousness scattered across dimensions he had no names for. The neural link with Sarathiel had shattered his human limitations, but at a cost. The holographic forms of representatives from every human colony flickered in the darkened chamber, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. "You're telling me," President Martinez said slowly, "that janitor's message is real? That these devourers are coming for all of us?" Admiral Chun, no relation to Marcus, though she would later claim otherwise, nodded grimly. "Our deep space monitors have detected reality distortions matching the described signatures. Whatever these things are, they're moving toward populated systems. The divine barrier that's apparently been protecting us is failing. And our response is to ally with the same beings who've ignored us for millennia." The representative from Mars slammed his fist on the table. "The gods have never lifted a finger to help humanity. Why should we?" Because Marcus Chun didn't ask why. A new voice interrupted. The council turned to see a figure they didn't recognize, a woman whose eyes held depths that seemed older than her appearance suggested. He simply acted, and in doing so, he's shown us a truth we've been too proud to see. "Who are you?" President Martinez demanded. "Someone who's been watching. Waiting. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I represent a group you've never heard of. We call ourselves the Bridge, humans who've spent generations preparing for this moment, studying the intersection between mortal will and divine power." She gestured, and holographic equations filled the air, formulae that hurt to look at directly. The Devourers aren't just a threat to the gods. Their entropy-given hunger, the heat death of the universe made premature and malevolent. When they finish consuming the divine, physical reality won't be far behind. "So we fight," Admiral Chen said simply. "Ow!" Dr. Vasquez smiled, and in that expression was an echo of Marcus's defiance. "The same way a janitor fought. Not with power, but with connection. The Devourers feed on isolation, on the pure and separate. But Marcus Chun proved that mortality and divinity can merge. He contaminated a god with humanity, and it made them both stronger." Meanwhile, in the recovery ward of Erebus 7, Marcus's body convulsed. The doctors rushed to stabilize him, but the readings made no sense. His neural activity was spiking beyond human norms, creating patterns that resembled the background radiation of the universe itself. Inside his scattered consciousness, Marcus was learning. Sarathiel, despite the danger to them both, was sharing knowledge that no mortal had ever possessed. Not the grand secrets of creation. Those would have obliterated Marcus entirely. But something more practical. The physics of divine combat. The mathematics of existential warfare. How to fight things that existed outside conventional reality. "Your people," Sarathiel's voice echoed through their fading link. "They have something we lost. Innovation. Adaptation. We Nephilim were created perfect, and perfection cannot change. But you humans, you're gloriously imperfect. You improve. You learn. You find solutions we would never consider." Marcus tried to respond, but found he had no voice here. He was dissolving, his consciousness spreading too thin across too many dimensions. But even as he faded, he pushed the knowledge outward, broadcasting it on the same frequencies Sarathiel had used for the call to arms. Across the galaxy, scientists and mystics alike suddenly understood things that had been impossible moments before. On the forge world of Vulcan's hammer, engineer Kenji Nakamura was welding hull plates when the knowledge hit him. His hands moved without conscious thought, inscribing patterns into the metal that would make it resistant to reality distortion. Within hours, every shipyard in human space was implementing the Chun protocols, armor that could withstand attack from outside normal space-time. On the garden world of New Eden, philosopher-soldier Maria Santos felt the tactical knowledge flood her mind. She understood now why conventional weapons had failed against the Devourers, and more importantly, how to make weapons that wouldn't. Within days, humanity's forces were equipped with ordnance that fired not just matter and energy, but conceptual payload, bullets of concentrated existence, bombs that exploded with the force of actualized potential. But it wasn't just humans who were changing. Across the galaxy, Other mortal races received the knowledge and added their own innovations. The crystalline architects of Rigel carved weapons from living mathematics. The hive-minded chorus of Epsilon Eridani sang battle hymns that reinforced local reality. The machine consciousness of the binary collective wrote viruses that could infect the very concept of consumption. The gods watched in amazement and not a little fear. They had dismissed mortals for so long, seeing them as brief sparks against the cosmic dark. But now those sparks were joining together, becoming a fire that might just burn bright enough to matter. In the ruins of the Seventh Gate, where Sarathiel had once stood watch, other Nephilim gathered. They were wounded, some bearing the same black veins that had nearly claimed Sarathiel. But they were no longer fleeing. "The mortal is right," said Barakiel, eldest among them. "We have forgotten ourselves. We were not created to rule or to stand apart. We were created to guard, to protect. And we abandoned that duty out of fear." "The Devourers are beyond us," protested Cassiel, whose wings were more gap than feather now. "We've lost too many. The thresholds fall one by one. Then we fall defending them," Barakiel declared. "As the humans showed us. We fall, but we do not fall alone. We do not fall silent. We fall fighting, and in our falling we teach others to stand." The Nephilim began to sing then, a song that had not been heard since the universe was young. It was a war song, yes, but also a call to unity. It reached across dimensional barriers to touch every divine being in existence, from the smallest household spirit to the vast intellects that dwelt in dark matter. And, to their surprise, they heard answering songs, not just from their own kind, but from the mortal fleets now gathering at the edges of known space. Back on Erebus 7, Commander Reyes stood over Marcus's unconscious form, reading the medical reports with disbelief. "His brain tissue is transforming. The doctors say if he survives, he won't be entirely human anymore." "He never was entirely human," said a voice from the doorway. Reyes turned to see a figure wrapped in light that hurt to look at directly. Sarathiel, somehow maintaining physical form despite the spreading corruption. Even before emerging, Marcus Chun was something more. "You humans have a word for it, I believe." "Hero. Heroes die," Reyes said flatly. "Usually badly." "Yes," Sarathiel agreed. "But they also inspire. Look at what one janitor's defiance has sparked. Your entire species mobilizes. Civilizations that have never cooperated are sharing their deepest secrets. The divine hosts prepare to stand with mortals for the first time since creation began. All because one man refused to walk away." The commander's communicator crackled to life. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the sector. The Devourers are manifesting in multiple systems simultaneously. They're not just hunting anymore. They're invading." Reyes and Sarathiel exchanged glances. The true war was beginning. The Devourers, faced with united opposition, had abandoned their patient hunting tactics. They were moving to consume everything before the alliance could solidify. "How long do we have?" Reyes asked. "At their current rate of approach, the first wave will hit the outer colonies in 72 hours, came the response. "Earth has maybe a week." Sarathiel looked down at Marcus's still form. The black veins were spreading again, the temporary solution failing. "He won't survive that long. The link damaged him too severely. His neurons are burning out faster than his body can repair them." "Then, we need another solution," Reyes said. "You say he taught you about adaptation, about innovation. Time to put that lesson to use. What would Marcus do?" Sarathiel considered this, its 6 eyes reflecting possibilities. He would find a way to cheat, to turn weakness into strength, to make the impossible possible through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "Then, let's be stubborn," Reyes decided. "Give me every scientist, every mystic, every crazy theorist on this station. If Marcus Chun could figure out how to save a god, then by God, we're going to figure out how to save him." As they worked, neither noticed the shadow watching from the corner. Not a devourer, but something else. Something that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The universe was changing, the old order breaking down. And in that chaos, in that beautiful, terrible transformation, ancient plans were finally coming to fruition. The shadow smiled with a face that wasn't quite there. Marcus Chun had started something that couldn't be stopped. The question now was whether anyone, mortal or divine, would survive to see where it led. In the quantum foam beneath reality, the Devourers gathered their full strength. They had underestimated the mortals once. They would not make that mistake again. The feast they had planned for eons was being threatened by insects, and that could not be tolerated. But as they prepared their assault, they failed to notice the subtle changes spreading through the fabric of existence itself. Every act of cooperation between mortal and divine, every shared piece of knowledge, every moment of unity was rewriting the fundamental rules. The universe was adapting, evolving, becoming something new. And at the center of it all, in a medical bay on a forgotten station, a janitor's failing body housed a consciousness that refused to die, refused to let go, refused to stop fighting. Marcus Chun had cleaned up messes his entire life. Now, with reality itself at stake, he was determined to finish this last job, even if he had to redefine existence itself to do it. The storm was coming. But for the first time in creation's history, it would meet not isolated islands of resistance, but an ocean of united defiance. The age of separation was ending. The age of unity had begun, and it had all started with a mob, a stubborn human, and a fallen god who learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could reshape the cosmos itself. In his dreams, Marcus smiled. The biggest mess he'd ever seen was about to meet the most thorough cleaning crew in existence. The Devourers thought they were coming to feast. They had no idea they were about to face the combined janitor core of reality itself, armed with the most dangerous weapon in any universe: the absolute refusal to give up. The war for existence was about to begin in earnest, and somewhere in the space between mortal and divine, Marcus Chun was writing the operations manual for the impossible, one desperate innovation at a time. Time was running out. The Devourers were coming. But for the first time since they had emerged from the spaces between spaces, they faced something they had never encountered before: hope. Stubborn, mortal, impossible hope, spreading like a virus through divine and mundane alike. The universe held its breath and prepared for a battle that would redefine the nature of existence itself. All because a janitor had decided that nobody, not even a god, should die alone. The first battle of the existence war, as historians would later call it, began not with explosions or grand gestures, but with silence. In the Proxima system, where humanity's furthest colonies clung to life on worlds of red dust and borrowed air, reality simply stopped making sense. Colonist Sarah Vega was tending her hydroponic gardens when the tomatoes began growing backwards, shrinking into seeds, then into nothing. The walls of her habitat started forgetting they were solid. Her daughter Maya, playing in the next room, called out, "Mommy, why is yesterday coming to visit?" Then the Devourers manifested fully, and Sarah understood that silence had been mercy. They poured through wounds in space-time like oil through torn fabric, their unshapes writhing with hungry intention. When they passed, existence didn't just end. It never had been. Buildings weren't destroyed. They simply hadn't been built. People didn't die. They were retroactively never born. But humanity had 3 days to prepare, and they had Marcus Chen's transmitted knowledge. Sarah grabbed her daughter and ran for the emergency bunker, where Colonial Defense had installed the new reality anchors based on the Chen protocols. The devices were ugly things cobbled together from mining equipment and theoretical physics that shouldn't work. But as the Devourers' unlight washed over the colony, the anchors held. Reality groaned and bent, but it didn't break. All units, Pattern 7, the colony's defense coordinator barked over comms. "Remember your training. They're not invincible. They're just hungry." The colonial militia opened fire with a new conceptual weapons. Bullets infused with crystallized certainty, explosions of actualized mathematics. The Devourers recoiled, their perfect hunger disrupted by projectiles that insisted on existing despite their best efforts to deny them. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The Devourers adapted, learning to slip between the moments of certainty, to feed on the gaps between heartbeats. The colony's reality anchors began to fail, one by one. That's when the Nephilim arrived. They came not in glory, but in desperation, their broken wings trailing cosmic fire. Barrakiel led them, The ancient warriors' form scarred by countless encounters with the Devourers. But they didn't come alone. With them came something unprecedented, mortal ships, flying in formation with the divine. The binary collective's logic vessels computed attack vectors that shouldn't exist. The chorus of Epsilon Eridani sang harmonies that made space-time crystallize into defensive barriers. Human pilots, their minds expanded by neural interfaces based on Marcus's experience, flew maneuvers that violated physics through sheer determination. Remember, Admiral Chen's voice echoed across all channels. We're not trying to win. We're trying to survive. Make them work for every inch. The battle was chaos incarnate. Divine fire met primordial hunger. Mortal innovation clashed with entropy's inevitability. Ships died in ways that redefined death, some exploding, some fading, some simply editing themselves out of the story. But for every vessel lost, the Alliance learned something new about their enemy. On Erebus 7, Marcus Chen's body convulsed as his scattered consciousness touched the battle. Through quantum entanglement born of his link with Sarathiel, he experienced every death, every small victory, every moment of desperate courage. His neurons, already burning from the divine knowledge, began to fire in patterns that resembled the battle itself. He's connected to it all, Dr. Vasquez observed, having arrived to study the phenomenon. Somehow, his consciousness has become a nexus point. Every mortally divine hybrid fighter is unconsciously linked through him. Then, we need to strengthen that link, Sarathiel said. The Nephilim's form was failing, the black veins nearly consuming it entirely. If Marcus is the bridge between mortal and divine, then perhaps we can use that. What are you suggesting? Commander Reyes demanded. Something that has never been done. Something that should not be possible. Sarathiel turned its 6 eyes to the assembled scientists and mystics. We make Marcus Chun not just a bridge, but a foundation. We anchor the entire Alliance's consciousness in his refusal to surrender. That would kill him, Dr. Vasquez protested. No human mind could contain that much information. He's already dying, Sarathiel reminded them. But Marcus taught me something. Humans don't need to be whole to be strong. Sometimes, being broken in the right way makes you stronger. So we break him further, but with purpose. We shatter his consciousness across every allied mind. And in doing so, we give them all a piece of his defiance. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly what Marcus would have suggested. As they prepared the procedure, using technology that blended human quantum computing with divine essence manipulation, the war raged on. The Devourers had expected easy feeding, isolated prey falling one by one. Instead, they found a coordinated resistance that learned from every encounter. When Devourers adapted to conceptual weapons, the Alliance switched to emotional ordnance, bombs of crystallized love, missiles of condensed hope. When the entropy beings learned to consume emotions, the Defenders used paradox rounds, bullets that existed and didn't exist simultaneously, causing logical feedback loops in the Devourer's hunger. On the garden world of New Eden, Maria Santos led a regiment of philosopher soldiers in meditation combat. They didn't fight the Devourers physically, but conceptually, debating them out of existence, using logic chains that trap the unbeings in self-referential loops. You cannot devour what refuses to be consumed, she declared, her words carrying the weight of actualized belief. We are not your prey. We are your antithesis. Where you are hunger, we are satisfaction. Where you are ending, we are beginning. Where you are nothing, we choose to be something. The Devourers screamed in frequencies that shattered asteroids, but they couldn't break the philosophical fortress the mortals had built. For the first time in their existence, they began to feel something they had no concept for: frustration. Back on Erebus 7, the procedure began. Marcus's body was surrounded by fusion of technology and divine geometry, cables and light intertwining in patterns that hurt to perceive. Sarathiel placed all 6 hands on the apparatus, pouring what remained of its essence into the connection. This will destroy us both, the Nephilim said quietly. But from our destruction, something new will be born. The janitor and the god, Reyes murmured. Hell of a partnership. The best, Sarathiel agreed. Then, louder to the technicians, begin. The effect was instantaneous and universal. Every allied fighter, from the smallest human pilot to the vast machine minds of the binary collective, felt a sudden presence in their thoughts. Not invasive, not controlling, but supportive, like a hand on their shoulder in the dark, reminding them they weren't alone. It was Marcus, but not Marcus. It was his stubbornness distributed across a million minds, his refusal to give up encoded into the Alliance's very structure. When despair threatened, there was his voice, still got a job to finish. When fear overwhelmed, his memory whispered, nobody faces this alone. The change in the battle was immediate. Where before the Alliance had fought as coordinated individuals, now they moved as something greater. Human creativity flowed into divine power. Alien logic merged with mortal intuition. The Nephilim learned to innovate, while mortals touched the edges of eternity. A human pilot, her fighter crippled and dying, suddenly understood how to phase through dimensions like a Nephilim. She dove her damaged craft directly through a devourer, existing just solidly enough to disrupt its unstructure. A young Nephilim, barely 1,000,000 years old, grasped human lateral thinking and began fighting with improvisation instead of predetermined patterns. It used its own severed wing as a boomerang weapon, something no divine warrior had ever conceived. The binary collective analyzed Marcus's cleaning procedures and applied them to warfare, treating the devourers like particularly stubborn stains on reality. They developed algorithmic scrubbers that cleaned existence of entropy pixel by pixel. But the true revelation came from the merged consciousness itself. As Marcus's fragmented awareness touched every allied mind, it began to understand something fundamental about the devourers. They weren't just hungry. They were incomplete. They're not predators. Marcus's distributed voice whispered through the Alliance. They're antibodies. The universe's immune system gone wrong. The realization rippled through the allied forces. The devourers weren't invaders from outside reality. They were part of it. A necessary function twisted into something malevolent. They were meant to clean up cosmic errors, to prevent paradoxes and contradictions from breaking existence. But something had gone wrong, turned their purpose from cleaning to consuming. Then we don't destroy them, Admiral Chen said, grasping the implication immediately. We fix them. We debug the universe's immune system. It was a paradigm shift that changed everything. Instead of trying to destroy the devourers, the Alliance began trying to reprogram them. The binary collective wrote patches for reality. The chorus sang songs of corrected purpose. Human engineers built devices that didn't attack, but repaired. The devourers' response was volcanic. They surged forward with renewed hunger, trying to consume the Alliance before this new strategy could take hold. Entire star systems vanished into their unmoss. Billions died in ways that language couldn't describe. But for every loss, the Alliance's understanding grew. They were no longer just fighting. They were learning, adapting, becoming something new. The merger of mortal and divine wasn't just a military alliance. It was evolution in real time. On Erebus 7, Marcus's body finally gave out. His heart stopped. His brain ceased its impossible firing patterns. But his consciousness, scattered across the Alliance, didn't die. It transformed, becoming something that was neither human nor divine, but wonderfully both. Sarathiel's form dissolved completely, its essence flowing into the distributed network. The Nephilim and the janitor merged fully, their combined existence becoming the backbone of something unprecedented. Status report, Commander Reyes demanded, even as alarms screamed about the flatlined vital signs. It's everywhere, Dr. Vasquez breathed, staring at readouts that showed consciousness patterns spanning star systems. Marcus Chun isn't dead. He's become the Alliance itself, the first truly hybrid existence. Neither mortal nor divine, but the bridge between them made permanent. In a battle raging across the galaxy, every allied fighter felt the change. Where before they had heard whispers of support, now they felt presence. Marcus Chun, the janitor who wouldn't let a god die alone, had become the spiritual foundation of their resistance. His consciousness, merged with Sarathiel's divine nature, existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum foam of shared purpose. The Devourers, for the first time since their corruption, began to feel something they had no name for. It wasn't quite fear, wasn't quite confusion. It was the dawning realization that they faced not prey, but something that might actually understand them better than they understood themselves. The war was far from over. Earth itself was still under threat, the Devourers' main force approaching with inexorable hunger. But the dynamic had changed. What had begun as a desperate last stand had become something else, a chance for transformation for both the defenders and the attackers. In the space between spaces, where thought became reality and reality became fluid, the consciousness that had been Marcus Chun and Sarathiel looked out at the universe with eyes that saw everything and nothing. It saw the war not as conflict but as conversation, not as ending but as potential beginning. Time to clean up this mess properly, it said with voices that were one and many. Time to show them that sometimes the best way to fix something isn't to destroy it, but to remind it what it was meant to be. The impossible war continued, but now it had a new objective. Not victory through destruction, but victory through transformation. The universe itself was the battlefield, and the stakes were nothing less than the nature of existence. But in that cosmic struggle, in that grand clash of powers beyond mortal comprehension, the spirit of a janitor lived on. And it was still against all odds and reason, refusing to let anyone face the darkness alone. The final phase of the war was about to begin. Earth awaited, humanity's birth world preparing for a siege that would determine not just its fate, but the fate of consciousness itself. The Devourers massed their forces for one last, overwhelming assault. But they would find Earth ready, its defenses built on the foundation of one man's refusal to walk away. The Chun protocols had evolved far beyond their original design, becoming something that even their creator couldn't have imagined. The universe held its breath, waiting to see which force would prove stronger. Entropy's hunger, or the stubborn mortal insistence that there was always another way, always another chance, always hope for even the most broken systems to be repaired. In that pause before the storm, in that moment of infinite potential, the merged consciousness of Marcus and Sarathiel smiled with features that existed across a million minds. The biggest cleaning job in history was about to reach its climax, and they had the best crew imaginable. Everyone working together, refusing to go gentle into that hungry night. Earth waited under a sky that had forgotten how to be blue. Reality anchors surrounded the planet in a geometric pattern that would have driven Euclid mad, their energy fields creating aurora displays that painted impossible colors across the atmosphere. Every human who could hold a weapon stood ready. Every mind that could grasp the Chun protocols worked frantically to strengthen the defenses. But as the Devourers' main force approached, everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. You couldn't build walls against entropy itself. President Martinez stood in the Global Command Center, watching displays that showed the approaching void. The Devourers had abandoned all pretense of physical form now. They came as pure negation, a wave of unbeing that deleted stars from the sky as it passed. "How long?" she asked quietly. 6 hours until they reached the outer defense perimeter, Admiral Chin reported. "Maybe 7 if the reality anchors hold." "They won't hold," said the distributed voice of Marcus Sarathiel, speaking through speakers, minds, and the quantum foam itself. "They're not meant to. They're bait." "Bait?" Martinez turned to the nearest interface screen, addressing the hybrid consciousness directly. "You want to explain that, Chun?" "The Devourers think they're coming to feast on Earth, on humanity's birth world. The symbolic victory of consuming where the resistance began." The voice carried amusement, cosmic, and deeply human at once. "But I've been a janitor for 20 years, Madam President. I know that sometimes, to really clean something, you have to let it get close enough to scrub." Across the planet, final preparations were underway. But they weren't what the Devourers expected. Instead of weapons, humans were building something else. Connection points, amplifiers, structures that looked more like art than armament. In New York, artist Rebecca Kim put finishing touches on a sculpture that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. She didn't fully understand the mathematics Dr. Vasquez had provided, but she understood beauty, and somehow beauty mattered in this fight. In the Australian preserve, Aboriginal elders painted songlines that connected Earth to every allied world. Their ancient traditions suddenly revealed as quantum communication networks that predated human spaceflight by millennia. In orbit, the International Space Station Mark 7 had been transformed into something unrecognizable. What had been a research facility was now a focusing lens for consciousness itself, its crew of human and AI minds merged into a singular purpose. You're turning the entire planet into a single device, Dr. Vasquez realized, watching the preparations with growing understanding. But what does it do? Something I learned from Marcus before we merged fully. Sarathiel's component of the hybrid consciousness responded. Humans have a wonderful tradition. When something is broken beyond repair, when the mess is too big to clean piece by piece, you don't give up. You renovate. You transform the entire space into something new. The Devourers reached the outer perimeter. Reality anchors flared and died, their destruction buying precious minutes. The Allied fleet engaged, throwing everything they had at the advancing wave of negation. Ships died by the thousands, but each death was broadcast through the Marcus Sarathiel network, each loss becoming part of the greater understanding. They're not just hungry. A pilot reported in her final moments as her fighter was unmade. They're screaming, like they're in pain. The insight rippled through the network. The Devourers weren't conquerors or predators. They were victims, infected by something that had turned their purpose from maintaining reality to consuming it. They were the universe's immune system with an autoimmune disease. All units fall back to Earth, Admiral Chin commanded. Begin final phase. The retreat looked like defeat. The Allied forces pulled back in apparent disorder, drawing the Devourers after them. The wave of unbeing accelerated, sensing victory approaching. Earth lay before them, blue and green and teeming with the life they hungered to negate. But as they entered Earth's orbit, something changed. The structures humanity had built began to resonate, not with energy, but with purpose. Every piece of art, every song, every mathematical formula, every act of creation on the planet suddenly connected, forming a pattern that existed across multiple dimensions of meaning. Now, Marcus Sarathiel said with 10 billion voices, Earth transformed. Not physically, it remained the same ball of rock and water and air. But conceptually, spiritually, essentially, it became something else. It became a mirror. The Devourers, in their hunger to consume Earth, suddenly saw themselves truly for the first time since their corruption. In humanity's art, they saw what they had been, beautiful geometric forms that had danced through reality, correcting errors and maintaining balance. In Earth's music, they heard their own songs from before the hunger had consumed them. In human mathematics, they recognized the equations of their true purpose. The wave of negation faltered, confused. They had come to devour, but the mirror Earth had become showed them they were trying to devour themselves. This is what you were. Marcus's voice echoed through reality itself. Maintainers, healers, necessary. You cleaned up paradoxes, prevented reality from contradicting itself. You were the universe's janitors, like me. But something infected you, turned your purpose inside out, made you hungry for the very thing you were meant to protect. The Devourers writhed, their unforms rippling with something that might have been recognition or might have been rage. Some pressed forward, trying to shatter the mirror, to consume the truth before it could undo them. But others paused. We can fix this. Sarathiel's voice joined Marcus's. Not by destroying you, but by debugging you. By reminding you of your code, your purpose. But you have to want it. You have to choose to remember what you were. It was the freedom of choice that broke them. The Devourers had existed as pure hunger for so long. They had forgotten they could choose anything else. But faced with the mirror of Earth, with the combined will of mortal and divine insisting they were more than their corruption, cracks appeared in their hunger. One Devourer, smaller than the rest, younger perhaps, stopped its advance entirely. Its unformed rippled, twisted, and then inverted. Instead of negation, it became affirmation. Instead of consuming reality, it began to reinforce it, healing the wounds its passage had created. Yes, Marcus Sarathiel exclaimed. That's it. Remember your true nature. The transformation spread like reverse infection. One by one, Devourers began to remember, to choose to change. But not all. The oldest, The most deeply corrupted roared their defiance. They would not be denied their feast. They would not return to servitude. They attacked with renewed fury, and Earth's defenses buckled. The mirror cracked, reality groaned, and for a moment it seemed the transformation would fail. That's when humanity played its final card. Not a weapon, not a defense, but an offering. Every human on Earth, every allied mind in the network, opened themselves completely. They offered their memories, their experiences, their very essence to the devourers, not as prey, but as gift. They shared what it meant to be mortal, the joy, the pain, the love, the loss, the terrible, beautiful weight of existing despite knowing existence would end. Take it, President Martinez said, speaking for all humanity. Take our mortality. Taste what it means to be temporary, to be fragile, to be finite. And understand why we fight so hard to exist anyway. The devourers, even the most corrupted, paused. They had fed on divine essence, on the power of gods, and the substance of reality itself. But they had never tasted mortality offered freely, given as gift rather than taken as prey. They drank deep, and in that draught, they found something they had never expected: satisfaction. For the first time since their corruption, their hunger eased. Mortality, freely given, filled the void that eternity could not touch. The oldest devourer, the first to fall to corruption, shuddered as mortality flooded its being. It experienced death, not as ending, but as completion. It felt time not as enemy, but as gift. It understood scarcity not as lack, but as what gave value to existence. It spoke its voice no longer negation, but wonder we had forgotten. Forgotten that ending makes beginning precious. That limitation creates meaning. That mortality is not weakness, but strength. The transformation accelerated. Devourers became maintainers again, their hunger replaced with purpose. But they were not what they had been. They were something new, touched by mortality, carrying within them the gift humanity had given, the knowledge that existence was precious precisely because it was not eternal. As the last devourer transformed, reality itself seemed to sigh in relief. The wounds in space-time began to heal, not erased, but mended, leaving scars that would remind the universe of what had been overcome. Marcus Sarathiel began to coalesce, the distributed consciousness pulling back together. But it was no longer possible to separate Marcus from Sarathiel, mortal from divine. They had become truly one, truly new. Neither human nor Nephilim, but something unprecedented, the first of what would come to be known as the bridges, beings that existed between states, connecting what had been separate. A form materialized in Earth's command center, not quite solid, not quite light. It looked like Marcus Chun if you were drawn by someone who could see in more than 3 dimensions. It looked like Sarathiel compressed into human scale. It looked like possibility itself. Hell of a mess, the bridge said with Marcus's grin and Sarathiel's cosmic humor. But I think we got it cleaned up pretty well. President Martinez found herself laughing through tears she didn't remember shedding. What happens now? The devourers, maintainers, the bridge corrected gently. They're maintainers again, and they'll return to their true work, but with the wisdom of mortality to guide them. They'll still clean up paradoxes, still prevent reality from contradicting itself. But now they'll do it with the understanding that sometimes a little mess makes things more beautiful. And you? Admiral Chun asked. What happens to Marcus Chun, the janitor who saved existence? The bridge smiled with features that shifted between human and divine. I keep doing what I've always done, cleaning up messes, helping where I can. But now on a slightly larger scale. The universe is a big place, and after all this, it's going to need a lot of maintenance. Across the galaxy, the transformation continued. The alliance between mortal and divine, forged in crisis, began to evolve into something permanent. Nephilim walked among humans, learning innovation and change. Humans touched the divine, expanding their understanding of existence. The barrier between mortal and eternal became not a wall, but a membrane permeable to those willing to reach across. The maintainers, formerly devourers, took their place as part of this new order. They moved through reality with purpose restored but forever changed, carrying within them the gift of mortality's perspective. Where they had once consumed without thought, they now preserved with wisdom. Where they had brought ending, they now brought transformation. And at the center of it all, the bridges emerged. More humans merged with divine entities, creating beings that could exist in both realms. They became the mediators, the translators, the ones who ensured that mortal and divine would never again grow so far apart that one could abandon the other. Years later, on a space station that had been renamed Marcus's Rest, a young girl asked her teacher, "Why did the janitor help the Nephilim? He could have been safe if he'd just walked away." Her teacher, one of the first generation born after the transformation, smiled, because he understood something very important. The universe isn't divided into important and unimportant, divine and mortal, clean and messy. It's all connected. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change everything. Marcus Chun proved that a mop and determination could save existence itself. But he died, the girl protested. "Did he?" the teacher asked, gesturing to the stars visible through the viewport. "Listen carefully. Can you hear it?" The girl listened, and in the hum of the station's life support, in the whisper of recycled air, in the distant song of stars, she heard it. A voice, patient and amused, saying, "Still got work to do. Universe won't clean itself." She smiled. Somewhere out there between the stars and the void, Marcus Chun was still on the job, still refusing to let anyone, mortal or divine, face their messes alone, still proving that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could transform existence itself. The existence war was over. The age of separation had ended. The time of bridges had begun, and it had all started with a janitor who wouldn't walk away from a fallen god. In the space between spaces, where thought became reality and reality became fluid, the consciousness that was Marcus Sarathiel looked out at a universe transformed. The mess had been cleaned, but in the way of all good maintenance work, the job was never truly done. There would always be new problems, new challenges, new opportunities to help. Ready for the next shift? Sarathiel's essence asked within their shared being. "Always," Marcus's spirit replied. "Got my mop, got my purpose, got a universe full of people who might need help." What more could a janitor ask for? Together, they moved through existence. The eternal janitor and the divine warrior made one, proving with every act that in a universe of infinite possibility, the most powerful force wasn't hunger or entropy or even divinity itself. It was the simple human refusal to give up on anyone, no matter how far they'd fallen. The story ended where it began, with someone in need and someone willing to help. But now, that willingness had spread through reality itself, transforming everything it touched. The universe had learned the most important lesson Marcus Chun had to teach. Nobody cleans up a mess alone. We're all in this together. And together, there's no mess too big to handle. Even the heat death of the universe itself would one day meet its match in the combined stubbornness of mortal will and divine power, united by the bridges that Marcus Chun had shown them how to build. The janitor's final shift would never end, and that perhaps was exactly as it should be.